I was sitting in my psychiatrist's office when I realized my brother had been poisoning my mind, literally and figuratively, for 2 years. The doctor was asking me questions about my mental breakdown, and I suddenly couldn't answer any of them honestly because I didn't know what was real anymore. My hands were shaking as she reviewed my medical file, and then she looked at me with this expression that I'll never forget. "Sophie," she said slowly, "these notes from your initial diagnosis, they don't match what I'm seeing in your current behavior at all." And in that moment, everything clicked. The medication, the isolation, the way my brother always made sure I felt too broken to question him. He didn't do this because he loved me or wanted to help me. He did this so he could control the one thing Dad left behind for me, $300,000 that was supposed to be mine when I turned 18. But how could I prove he'd deliberately made me sick? How could I prove that the person I was supposed to trust most in the world had weaponized my own fear of becoming like our mother? If this story already touches your heart, please subscribe and stay with me to hear what happened next. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You might feel less alone in your own struggles. Setup: 2,000 words. My name is Sophie Chen, and I'm 16 years old. Before my dad died, I had a pretty normal life. I went to Lincoln High, I was on the debate team, I wrote for our school literary magazine, and I had dreams about going to college somewhere on the East Coast, maybe to study psychology, which is honestly ironic given what my brother would later do with that information. My dad was this quiet, steady person. He wasn't flashy or demanding. He just showed up. He made us breakfast on Sunday mornings. He helped me with my college essays even though his English wasn't perfect. He hugged me without awkwardness, which I've learned is rare for a lot of teenagers to experience. My older brother Marcus was different. Marcus was 12 years older than me, which meant that by the time I was born, he was already a teenager figuring out his own life. We weren't super close growing up, but he wasn't a bad brother, or at least, that's what I thought. He was studying business at university when I was in middle school. He came home for holidays. He had this charm about him that adults responded to immediately. Teachers loved him. His friends were always around. He had ambition. Dad would talk about how Marcus was going to do great things, and Marcus seemed to accept this as simple fact. Our mom had mental illness. I want to be clear about this because it becomes crucial to understanding what my brother did. Our mom struggled with bipolar disorder and anxiety. She was hospitalized twice when I was very young. I don't have clear memories of her having episodes. Mostly, I remember the absence. The quiet house, Dad picking me up from school earlier than usual, the way adults spoke in hushed voices when they thought I wasn't listening. My mom eventually left when I was 8. She moved back to be closer to her own family. She sends birthday cards and we video call on holidays, but she isn't part of our day-to-day life. Dad never spoke badly about her, but I could tell it hurt him. And I think he was terrified that someday, somehow, I might inherit her struggles. When Dad died 2 years ago, a heart attack, completely unexpected, everything changed overnight. I was 14. Marcus was suddenly not just my older brother, but my legal guardian. He was appointed trustee of my inheritance, which included Dad's house and $300,000 in a trust fund that I would have access to at 18. Marcus was 26, and suddenly he was responsible for me, which sounds like a heavy burden, except I think he saw it differently. I think he saw it as an opportunity. At first, the first few months after Dad died, Marcus was actually kind to me. He was there. He took time off work. He drove me to my grief counseling sessions at school. He made sure I ate. He let me talk about Dad without shutting it down. I was so grateful. I was so broken, and I needed someone to care, and he was there. Looking back now, I realized that was probably the most crucial time he was grooming me, building trust so that when he made his move, I would never suspect him. He spent months becoming the only person I trusted. And then he started it. It was subtle at first, the way gaslighting always is. We'd be eating dinner, and he'd say something like, "You know, you've been kind of jumpy lately. Are you okay?" And I would think about it, and maybe I was more anxious than usual, so I'd agree. Then he'd say, "Yeah, I've noticed you've been forgetting things in class. Your teacher emailed me." I hadn't actually been forgetting things, but he said it with such certainty that I started to doubt my own memory. "I'm just worried about you," he'd say. "You remind me of Mom when she was your age before she started having episodes." That phrase. That phrase destroyed me in the most insidious way possible because it activated my deepest fear. I was terrified of becoming like my mother. I didn't want to end up hospitalized or abandoned by my family or medicated or unable to function. So when my brother, the person I was supposed to trust, the person who was supposed to protect me after Dad died, started suggesting that I was showing early signs of mental illness, I listened. And I believed him. "Have you been sleeping okay?" he'd ask. "Not really," I'd admit, because grief makes sleep impossible sometimes. "See, that's a symptom," he'd say. Mom had insomnia before her first hospitalization. I started seeing myself through his lens. Every emotion became suspicious. Every moment of anxiety was a red flag. Every time I was tired or moody, which is completely normal for a 16-year-old, by the way, I interpreted it as evidence that I was losing my mind. And Marcus was always there, documenting it, reinforcing it, making me feel like I was deteriorating in real time. By the time he suggested I see a psychiatrist, I was begging for it. I wanted help. I wanted to be fixed before I became like my mother. I was so scared. I was so desperate to not be broken that I walked into that psychiatrist's office already convinced that something was fundamentally wrong with me, and that's when everything got darker. Inciting incident. 3,000 words. The psychiatrist Marcus found for me was Dr. Gerald Hutchins, a man in his 50s who worked out of a medical office building across town. I'd never been to a therapist before, so I didn't know what to expect. Marcus drove me there. He wanted to give context to the doctor about my behavior. And I just sat in the waiting room, terrified, convinced I was about to be diagnosed with something serious. I remember the white walls and the outdated magazines and the way my heart was pounding. When Dr. Hutchins called me back into his office, he barely looked at me. He was reading notes on his clipboard. Notes I later learned that Marcus had written, and he was nodding before I'd even sat down. "So your brother says you've been experiencing insomnia, anxiety, forgetfulness, and emotional instability," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was like he was reading me a diagnosis rather than asking me about my symptoms. I guess so," I said, because by that point, I believed all of those things about myself. "I've just been really worried since my dad died, and I keep thinking something's wrong with me." He scribbled something. "Grief can trigger latent mental illness," he said. "It's actually fairly common in families with a history of psychiatric conditions." "Your brother mentioned your mother's bipolar disorder?" "Yeah, she had some episodes when I was young." "And you're worried you might develop similar conditions?" "Yes," I whispered. He closed his clipboard. "I think we should start you on an SSRI antidepressant. It will help with anxiety and mood regulation. We'll monitor you closely." The entire visit was probably 20 minutes. He asked me almost no follow-up questions. He didn't ask about my sleep schedule or what was triggering my anxiety or whether I had suicidal ideation or any of the things I learned later that a responsible psychiatrist should ask. He just prescribed medication, and he sent me back out to the waiting room where Marcus was sitting, and Marcus smiled at me like he'd just saved my life. I started taking sertraline that week. It was a low dose, which I think is why the side effects took a few days to fully hit, but when they did, they were brutal. I felt numb, like someone had wrapped my entire emotional range in cotton. I couldn't cry, and I had so much to cry about, but I also couldn't feel happy. I was just existing in this gray, muted space. I had headaches constantly. I felt dizzy when I stood up too fast. I had trouble concentrating, which was ironic because the medication was supposedly going to help with that. I told Marcus all of this, and he nodded like it was exactly what he expected. "That's normal," he said. The adjustment period is rough, but it gets better. You just have to push through it. The medication is helping you, even if it doesn't feel like it. And I believed him because he'd become the authority figure in my life. He was my guardian. He was taking me to my psychiatry appointments. He was the one asking Dr. Hutchins how I was really doing during the appointments, speaking about me like I wasn't in the room. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. Marcus was also becoming my primary barrier to any other perspective. My best friend Liam kept asking me why I was always so tired and emotional. And when I tried to explain about the medication, Marcus suddenly became very concerned about how much time I was spending with Liam. "He doesn't understand what you're going through," Marcus said. "You should probably focus on stabilizing yourself before spending so much time with other people." So I distanced myself from Liam. My grandmother called one Sunday to check on me, and I mentioned the medication. She wanted to know more details, and I started explaining. But Marcus took the phone from me and told her that Dr. Hutchins was handling everything, and that she shouldn't worry. "We don't need anyone questioning the doctor's judgment," he said when he hung up. "Your grandmother means well, but she's not equipped to understand modern psychiatry." So I didn't talk to Grandma as much. At school, my grades started slipping not because I couldn't understand the material, but because I literally didn't care about anything. I'd sit in class and stare at the board and feel nothing. A teacher asked me if something was wrong, and I mentioned the medication. And somehow this information got back to Marcus, who scheduled an appointment with my school counselor to explain my situation and essentially, preemptively, shut down any concerns from school staff about my well-being. "Sophie is undergoing psychiatric treatment for early onset anxiety and depression," he told Mr. Williams, the counselor in front of me. "We're hoping the medication will help stabilize her mood. If her grades slip a bit during this period, I hope the school will be understanding." Mr. Williams patted my shoulder sympathetically, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't unstable. I wanted to tell him that my brother had made me take medication I didn't actually need. But I couldn't. Because by that point, Marcus had so thoroughly convinced me and everyone around me that I was mentally fragile, that saying anything else felt like denial. 3 months into the medication, I had my follow-up appointment with Dr. Hutchins. Marcus came with me, as always. The appointment was another 20 minutes. Dr. Hutchins asked me how I was feeling, and I said I was stable, which was the word Marcus always used. He didn't ask me specific questions. He didn't ask me whether I felt the medication was helping. He just refilled the prescription and increased the dose. "Higher doses typically work more effectively," he told me. "We want to make sure you're fully protected against any episodes." I left that appointment with a higher dose of medication and a prescription for something else, a low-dose antipsychotic that he said would provide additional mood stability. I was 16 years old and being chemically controlled, and I didn't even fully understand it was happening, but something inside me was starting to crack. Not in the way Marcus wanted, not in a way that made me more compliant or more frightened. It was a tiny, quiet voice that whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Rising action. 4,500 words. 6 months into the medication regime, I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. I'd lost about 12 pounds because food tasted like nothing. My skin had broken out in a rash that itched constantly. My hands shook sometimes for no reason. I felt like I was watching my own life from behind glass, present but disconnected, unable to really feel anything deeply. The isolation was the worst part. Marcus had successfully cut me off from almost everyone who might have offered a different perspective. Liam still tried to reach out, but I'd become so withdrawn that our friendship had basically disintegrated. Grandma had been put at arm's length. My school counselor was convinced that my emotional distance was part of my condition, rather than a side effect of medication. And my mother, when she called, Marcus would tell her I was having a rough day, or already sleeping, so she stopped calling as often. I was alone with Marcus and his narrative about my mental illness, and that narrative was becoming my reality. But then Liam did something that saved my life. He showed up at my house one afternoon in early spring. I was doing homework in my room, feeling nothing as usual, when he just appeared at my window. He climbed through it like we were in middle school again, when we used to sneak out to watch horror movies in my room that our parents would have forbidden. I was shocked enough that I actually felt something, a flutter of something like the old Sophie. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "You're not you anymore," he said simply. "And I know what your brother has been telling you, but I've been researching, and Sophie, I think something's really wrong." "I'm getting help," I said quietly. The medication has made you a zombie," Liam interrupted. "And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. You used to talk for hours about books and ideas in your dreams. Now you barely talk at all. Your hands shake. You've lost so much weight. You don't even seem happy or sad. You just seem empty." And hearing him say it, I felt something break open inside me. Because I knew he was right. I knew that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. But I'd been so thoroughly convinced that I was sick, that I was like my mother, that I was unstable, that I'd accepted it as fact. "My brother says I need the medication," I whispered. "Your brother controls the trust fund," Liam said, and the words hung in the air between us like a bomb. Did you ever think about that? Did you ever think about why he'd want you medicated and confused and isolated? I stared at him. He wouldn't do that. Wouldn't he? Liam pulled out his phone and showed me an article about medical abuse and financial exploitation. It was like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. I started seeing patterns I'd been blind to. The careful isolation, the way Marcus documented my symptoms, the way he'd become the sole authority figure in my life, the way the medication had made me too foggy to question anything. "I think you need to get a second opinion," Liam said. "From a different doctor, someone Marcus doesn't know." "My brother will never agree to that," I said, panic starting to rise in my chest. "Then don't ask him," Liam said. I looked up therapists in town. There's a Dr. Sarah Patel who specializes in adolescent mental health. My mom actually knows her. She's supposed to be really good. I can help you figure out how to set up an appointment. That was the beginning of my real investigation. Though I didn't know it at the time. Getting an appointment with Dr. Patel without Marcus finding out was harder than I expected. Liam helped me create an email account he could access so Dr. Patel's office could email appointment confirmations without them showing up on my phone. We scheduled an appointment for a Tuesday afternoon. I told Marcus I was staying after school for debate team, which he didn't question, because debate team was something he approved of. Something that appeared to be healthy. The appointment was terrifying. I was so used to Dr. Hutchins' rapid-fire, dismissive style that sitting across from Dr. Patel, who actually looked at me and waited for me to speak and asked follow-up questions, felt surreal. I brought all my medical records from Dr. Hutchins with me, and I described my symptoms to her as carefully as I could. "Tell me about when you started the medication," she said, leaning forward slightly. "About 8 months ago. I was having anxiety and insomnia after my dad died, and my brother took me to see Dr. Hutchins, and he prescribed sertraline." "How were you feeling before the medication?" "I was sad," I admitted. "But I think that was normal grief, not actual mental illness." "Has anyone done a full psychiatric evaluation with you? Beyond the initial appointment with Dr. Hutchins?" I shook my head. "He just prescribed something." Dr. Patel's expression shifted. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked to see my medical records. I handed them over, and I watched her read through them. Her jaw tightened. "Sophie," she said carefully, "I want to be honest with you. These notes are concerning, but not in the way you think. The initial diagnosis here is vague and doesn't follow standard diagnostic criteria. The symptom descriptions are written by someone else, not by you. And the progression of medication, increasing the dose and adding an antipsychotic after just 3 months, doesn't align with standard psychiatric protocols for a first-time patient, especially a minor." I felt my heart start to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Dr. Patel said slowly, that I'm not comfortable continuing with this medication regimen without more investigation. I want you to undergo a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation with me. I want to talk to you about your actual symptoms, not written descriptions. And I think we need to talk to your guardian about this, because medication changes shouldn't happen without proper oversight. My brother won't listen, I heard myself say. He'll just say you don't understand. Then we'll need to involve other people, Dr. Patel said. A school counselor or your grandmother or potentially child protective services if necessary. But Sophie, I need you to understand something. If what you're describing is accurate, you're being medicated unnecessarily, and that's a form of abuse. The word abuse broke something open in me. I started crying, which I hadn't been able to do properly in months because the medication had numbed me so thoroughly. Dr. Patel handed me tissues and waited, and I told her everything. About my dad dying, about Marcus becoming my guardian, about the trust fund and the isolation and how I'd convinced myself I was going insane. We're going to get this figured out, Dr. Patel said quietly. But I need you to be prepared for some difficult conversations. She was right. Over the next few weeks, everything escalated. Dr. Patel contacted my school counselor, Mr. Williams, and explained her concerns. Mr. Williams, to his credit, was horrified that he'd been manipulated by Marcus and immediately became supportive. Dr. Patel also reached out to my grandmother, and Grandma came to one of my appointments. I watched my grandmother's face as Dr. Patel explained the situation. I watched her realize that her grandson had been systematically medicalizing his sister to control her and isolate her from the people who might have protected her. Grandma's hands were shaking. He did this to access her trust fund, Dr. Patel explained. As long as Sophie was medicated and compliant and isolated, she wouldn't question his management of the trust fund. She wouldn't have advocates pushing back. Grandma asked to see the trust documents, and that's when she discovered something crucial. Marcus had been making regular transfers from my trust fund to himself, telling the trustee account that it was for medical expenses and guardian care. Thousands of dollars had been moved into his personal accounts in the past 8 months. This is financial abuse, Mr. Williams said. This might be embezzlement. That's when we contacted a lawyer. Mr. Rodriguez, the family lawyer, was meticulous. He reviewed every piece of documentation, my medical records, the trust documents, the bank statements showing Marcus's transfers, the emails between Marcus and Dr. Hutchins, which we obtained through formal request. With each piece of evidence, the picture became clearer and more damning. Marcus hadn't just medicated me unnecessarily. He'd done it strategically, with Dr. Hutchins' help. And yes, Dr. Hutchins was also eventually investigated for malpractice, but that's a separate issue. He'd used my vulnerability after my father's death to gaslight me into believing I was mentally ill. He'd isolated me from every person who might have offered a different perspective or protection. He'd chemically controlled me with medication I didn't need. And then he'd used my medicated, compliant state to justify financial transfers that weren't legally authorized. I was 16 years old, and my own brother had orchestrated a methodical campaign to make me doubt my own mind so he could steal from me. But the hardest part, the thing that still makes me angry when I think about it, was realizing how close he came to succeeding. If Liam hadn't shown up at my window, if Dr. Patel had been dismissive instead of thorough, if I'd waited even another few months before seeking a second opinion, Marcus might have successfully transferred the entire trust fund. I might have spent years medicated, questioning my own sanity, completely cut off from people who could have helped me. I'll never forget sitting in that lawyer's office, looking at the evidence of my brother's betrayal laid out in neat folders and spreadsheets. And I remember thinking, he's about to find out that I'm not as broken as he thought I was. Climax and Justice 500 words. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in late April. By that point, Mr. Rodriguez had documented everything. He'd contacted the police about the financial fraud. He'd reported Dr. Hutchins to the state medical board, and he'd filed a formal petition to have Marcus removed as my trustee and to have him prosecuted for embezzlement and financial abuse of a minor. Marcus didn't know any of this. I'd continued taking the medication through all of it, as Dr. Patel and I had planned. It was important that Marcus didn't suspect anything. Dr. Patel and I had also started a careful process of tapering my medication dosage, which I was doing under her supervision. By the time the confrontation happened, I was thinking more clearly than I had in months, though I was still taking some of the original dose to avoid triggering Marcus's suspicion. My grandmother was the one who suggested we do the confrontation at her house. "Neutral territory," she said. "And there are people who care about you here." Mr. Rodriguez came, Dr. Patel came, my grandmother, of course, and Liam, who sat next to me and held my hand the entire time. Marcus arrived around 6 o'clock, not knowing what he was walking into. He saw the lawyer and his expression shifted immediately, from comfortable to wary. "What's going on?" he asked, his charm temporarily abandoned. "We need to talk about your management of Sophie's trust fund," Mr. Rodriguez said calmly, "and about her medical care." For the next hour, Mr. Rodriguez laid out everything. The unauthorized transfers, the suspicious medication regimen, the lack of proper psychiatric evaluation, the systematic isolation. He showed Marcus copies of bank statements, medical records, emails. He explained that he'd already filed reports with law enforcement and the medical board. Marcus's face went through several stages. First confusion, then denial. Sophie's medical situation required these expenditures. Then anger. I've been her guardian. I did what I thought was best. And finally, desperation. He tried to claim that my medical expenses had been legitimate. He tried to say that he'd been acting in my best interest. He even tried to appeal to my grandmother, asking her to remember how unstable I'd been, how much I'd needed help. But then it was my turn to speak. I was terrified. My hands were shaking. But I stood up and looked at my brother, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in 2 years. "You medicated me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You gave me medication I didn't need because you knew it would make me doubt myself. You knew it would make me easier to control. You knew it would make me believe that something was fundamentally wrong with me when the only thing that was wrong was what you were doing to me. Sophie, you needed help." "No," I said. "You needed me to need help. Because if I was sick, if I was unstable like Mom, then you could justify stealing from me. You could justify isolating me. You could justify manipulating every person in my life. But I'm not sick, Marcus. I was sad because Dad died. I had anxiety because I'd been through trauma. Those are normal human responses, not mental illness. And you exploited them." I could see the moment he realized he'd lost. The moment he understood that his carefully constructed narrative had collapsed. His face hardened, and he stood up. "I'm done with this," he said, heading for the door. "You can't just leave," Mr. Rodriguez said firmly. "We need to discuss the trust fund and the restitution you owe to Sophie's account." "Talk to my lawyer," Marcus snapped, and he left. Just walked out. He was arrested 2 days later at his apartment. The police had been waiting for him when he tried to access his bank accounts to transfer more money out of the country. He was charged with financial abuse of a minor, embezzlement, and fraud. Dr. Hutchins faced his own legal consequences. His medical license was suspended pending an investigation, and he later faced charges related to his role in the medical abuse. The weeks that followed were complicated in ways I didn't expect. Everyone suddenly wanted to be sorry. My school counselor expressed guilt about being manipulated by Marcus. The school principal issued a formal apology. Distant family members called with sympathy and stories about how they'd always had concerns about Marcus, which, let's be honest, rang a bit hollow. Even my mother called, and we had a long conversation where she apologized for not being present more, for letting me be so vulnerable in the first place. But the person I needed to hear from was my grandmother. She came to stay with me for a few weeks after Marcus's arrest, and one night we were sitting on her back porch, and she took my hand and said, "I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. Your father would never have let this happen." "It's not your fault," I told her. "He manipulated everyone." "I know," she said. "But you're my granddaughter, and I should have been more present. If you'll have me, I'd like to change that. I'd like you to stay with me, officially. I've already talked to Mr. Rodriguez about modifying your guardianship, and that's what happened. I moved in with Grandma, officially became her responsibility, and more importantly, I stopped being under Marcus's control. The medication tapering was the next crucial step. Dr. Patel very carefully, over the course of 3 months, reduced my doses under close supervision. The withdrawal process was actually harder than the initial medication in some ways. My body had become dependent on these drugs. Tapering off meant dealing with nausea, vivid dreams, emotional swings, and brain zaps, a weird electric sensation in my head that I learned was a known side effect of SSRI withdrawal. But for the first time in months, I was becoming myself again. I could feel emotions. Not all of them pleasant. I grieved my father properly during this period without the medication numbing me, but they were real. They were mine. I could think clearly. I could focus on schoolwork. I could laugh without it feeling like I was pretending. By the time the legal proceedings really got rolling, I had to testify in court about what Marcus had done and how the medication had affected me. I was terrified. I had to face him across a courtroom and explain how he'd manipulated me. I had to explain to a judge why I believed I'd been intentionally medicated. I had to relive the isolation and the confusion and the shame of having believed I was going insane when actually I was just a traumatized teenager being systematically exploited by the one person who was supposed to protect me. The prosecution was meticulous. They presented the evidence in clear, damning detail. Marcus's lawyer tried to claim that everything had been done in my best interest, that Marcus had genuinely believed I needed psychiatric help, that the medication transfers were legitimate medical expenses. But the financial evidence was irrefutable. The dates of the trust fund transfers corresponded exactly with Marcus's personal purchases: a new car, a luxury condo down payment, expensive vacations. There was no ambiguity. The judge was stern. She referred to what Marcus had done as systematic financial and medical abuse of a minor. She sentenced him to 4 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 2 years. She also ordered him to repay the full amount he'd stolen from my trust fund, plus interest and penalties. That amount came to $187,000. When the gavel came down, I felt this rush of something: relief, vindication, catharsis. I'd been believed. The systems that were supposed to protect me had, eventually, actually done their job. Resolution and impact, 2,800 words. Looking back now, almost a year after Marcus's arrest, I'm in a completely different place than I was 18 months ago. I'm off the medication entirely. My prescribing doctor is now Dr. Patel, who actually listens to me and considers my input in treatment decisions. We talk about the trauma I experienced, not just the medical abuse, but also the death of my father and the betrayal by my brother. That's real therapy. That's actual help. I live with my grandmother, and it's been healing in ways I didn't expect. She's become this anchor in my life. We cook together. We talk about my father, real memories, not the filtered version that Marcus had been presenting. Grandma tells me stories about my dad as a young man, about his dreams, about who he was before he became just dad to me. It's painful sometimes, but it's also necessary. School is different now, too. My grades have recovered. I'm back on the debate team, and I'm actually competing again instead of just going through the motions. I'm writing more, not just for the school literary magazine, but personal essays about my experience, about what happened to me. My English teacher encouraged me to enter a writing competition for young people who've experienced trauma, and I actually won. The prize included a small scholarship for college, and yes, I still want to study psychology. But now it's not coming from a place of fear. It's coming from a place of understanding the complexity of mental health, the importance of proper diagnosis, the dangers of medical and financial abuse. I want to help other people recognize the warning signs of what happened to me. I want to advocate for better safeguards in psychiatric care for minors, for more rigorous evaluation protocols, for consequences when doctors are complicit in abuse. Liam and I are best friends again. Actually, we're more than that now. We're together, officially, which neither of us expected, but both of us are really happy about. He's been supportive through all of this, and he keeps reminding me that it wasn't my fault, that I shouldn't feel shame about being manipulated by someone I trusted. He's also learning about psychology with me, trying to understand the mechanisms of gaslighting and medical abuse so he can help other people recognize it too. My mother and I are rebuilding our relationship too. I don't know if we'll ever be close the way some daughters and mothers are, but we're trying. She's in therapy herself, dealing with her own mental health journey and the guilt she carries about not being present for me. We're having conversations about her bipolar disorder, about how my fear of inheriting her struggles made me vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation. Those conversations are complicated, but they're also honest in a way they've never been before. As for Marcus, he's in federal prison. His current sentence is 4 years, but he's appealing, which is his right. The appeals process will probably take years. The money he owes me has been ordered by the court to be repaid when and if he's released, though whether he'll actually be able to repay it is questionable. What matters to me isn't the money. That was always his priority, never mine. What matters is that his actions had consequences, that I was believed. That systems failed me but eventually corrected course. Dr. Hutchins faced his own consequences. His medical license was suspended, and he eventually surrendered it rather than face full prosecution. He's no longer practicing, which means he can't manipulate other vulnerable people the way he did me, and the way he was apparently complicit in Marcus's scheme. The hardest part of this whole experience has been processing the betrayal from someone I was supposed to trust unconditionally. Marcus was my older brother. After our father died, he was the only family I had immediately available. I needed him to be who I thought he was, and instead he was a predator who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. That's a hard thing to accept about someone. It's a hard thing to forgive, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. Forgiveness seems like letting him off the hook for something that was premeditated and cruel. But I'm learning to live with the anger in a way that doesn't poison me. I'm learning to accept that he exists, that he did what he did, and that I survived it. I'm also learning to recognize the difference between healthy psychology and pathologization. I get anxious sometimes, that's normal. I have days where I feel sad, that's normal. I think deeply about things and get lost in my own head. That's normal, especially for someone my age who loves writing and thinking. None of those things mean I'm sick. None of those things mean I'm like my mother or destined for mental illness. They just mean I'm human. The thing that people keep asking me is, how do you feel about everything now? And honestly, it's complicated. I'm angry at Marcus for what he did. I'm frustrated with Dr. Hutchins for his complicity. I'm sad that my father died and left me vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. I'm grateful for Liam, for Dr. Patel, for my grandmother, for Mr. Rodriguez, for all the people who eventually stepped in and believed me. But more than any of that, I'm proud of myself. I was gaslit. I was medicated unnecessarily. I was isolated and manipulated and financially exploited. And somehow, some part of me that Marcus couldn't quite destroy kept whispering that something was wrong. That part of me listened to Liam when he showed up at my window. That part of me trusted Dr. Patel when she listened carefully and asked good questions. That part of me was willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, the narrative my brother had constructed wasn't the complete truth. That took courage, even though I didn't feel brave at the time. It took trust in my own instincts, even when everyone around me, the people who were supposed to protect me, were telling me that my instincts were symptoms of mental illness. I want to tell anyone watching this who has ever felt gaslit or manipulated or medicated without proper evaluation. You know yourself better than anyone else. You know what's real and what isn't. And if something feels wrong, if a doctor or a family member is making you doubt your own sanity, get a second opinion. Find someone you trust. Reach out. Tell someone. Because there are people who will listen and there are systems that can help, even though those systems aren't perfect. My father left me $300,000 in his will because he loved me and wanted to provide for my future. My brother tried to steal that and my sanity in the process, but I got both back. I got my mind back. I got my agency back. And I'm going to use my future to help people recognize and escape the kind of abuse I survived. That's what I'm most proud of. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more stories of strength and vindication. Have you ever experienced a situation where you weren't believed or where you had to fight for your own truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. You might help someone else realize they're not alone. And to anyone out there who is being medicated without proper evaluation, who is being gaslit by someone you trust, who is being financially exploited, you deserve better. You deserve real help from real professionals who listen to you as a person, not just a diagnosis. You deserve advocates. You deserve justice, and you deserve to trust yourself again. Thank you for listening to my story. The stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. We believe in supporting young people and treating all family members with love and respect. These stories are meant to inspire reflection on family relationships and the importance of compassion and truth. Any resemblance to real people, events, or families is purely coincidental and unintentional. These narratives carry no specific cultural, political, or religious implications.